Hello, everybody. And when I say everybody, my plan is working out perfectly because there's only 2 people online. I've deliberately started the stream. Hello, everybody. At 9 o'clock, Pacific time, which I've just found out is a time that most people are not online. Your East Coasters, it's midnight. Europe, I think it's still not quite like the morning. And this is truly just a test, unless what I'm about to try works. And if it does work, then it's going to be a short show on something that we have never talked about or discussed or done, which is about grooves, playing with grooves and writing grooves or patterns. It's come up a few times in a few different ways. It's come up, when people asking writing about pop tunes, and it's also come up when people ask about how the kind of playing chops that you need in order to be a composer, which I usually stay away from. However, since we do have even a few people online, before I get into this, because this will just end this test right now, all I need to know is whether or not this live playback from Cubase Groove Agent actually works. You guys ready? I just flicked off all that jazz to watch this. All right, well, you let me know if this groove is working, and I'll put on my headphones. Because if this is working, this is going to be an advertisement for Apple Computer, because this should not work. Let's try this. Did that work? Did you guys hear that? Was that in time? Did it work? Tell me that worked. That's incredible if that worked, because it's not supposed to, which means that we are benefiting from an audio problem. Was I playing in time? Really? It was working. Okay. All right. So be it. I will tell you then. All right, then we'll do this. Okay, actually, all right. So here's what it is. So I was thinking about, because playing chops is something that obviously helps composing, because if you can play, there's a lot of ways in which it makes it easier. I've always said, it doesn't have to, whatever, but it helps. Nonetheless, in terms of writing, I used to, every day, what I did was I had my piano, or later synthesizer, but it started out with just a piano, and like the earliest drum machines, I had like an RX-11 drum machine, and I had a little microphone on the piano, and then I had the drum machine, and then I would just listen to myself play, and I would play along the drum machine all the time. And obviously, this is way more fun than a regular metronome, it's more creative and more inspiring. But what I also realized, 2 things happened by accident. One thing, it would actually help me develop a lot of sensibilities as a session player that I ended up capitalizing on, and also helped me learn to write grooves. I didn't know that was going to happen, but it did. In addition to just learning to play to a metronome, which was important, it also forced me to get real with the concept of how to create the feeling of sections, various sections, when all I had was the piano. I didn't have pads, I didn't have other instruments, I just had drums and then my piano, and I wanted sections to have a delineation. I wanted to have a B section and a C section, and I wanted to have crescendos and decrescendos. I wanted to have the songs, these groove tunes or whatever, I wanted them to have shape, but I only had one instrument. And it turns out that learning how to do that, figuring out the way to do that, translated later into, okay, that role can be performed by these instruments maybe more effectively, but it taught me what to do in various sections in order to keep the drama moving and to keep the interest going. And it taught me what is the most important component of these various sections in order to keep the drama going and the interest going, all of which ended up translating later to orchestration, and all of which later founded the bedrock principles that I talk about in terms of writing at the piano, because your piano approximation can tell you everything. It has my entire life, and we've just never talked about it, not in any way. So I thought, you know what? It actually started. I have Cubase, but I don't use anything in it except the record button. So today I thought, well, let me poke around a little bit, and I found this Groove Agent, which I'm sure everybody knows about, but I just found about, and I don't use loops or anything like that. I'm like, oh, drum loops, these are going to be horrible, and most of them are totally terrible. But I realized, you know what? I just went through and I found a couple loops, and I'm like, you know what? If you wanted to learn how to play better and learn grooves and learn stuff about writing pop tunes or grooves, like this is perfect. I would have killed for this when I was 16 or 14 or whatever, because I had to program my own stuff. So what I'm going to do is I just pulled up a couple grooves. I didn't go through all of them. I don't know. I only got through the A, B, C's, and I'm like, fuck this. So I have a few grooves, but I found a few that will help me illustrate a couple of principles. If you've ever played session stuff, if you've ever studied rock stuff, this stuff will be totally old hat. Nonetheless, if you haven't, I guarantee there's all kinds of stuff in here that will get you thinking. So I pulled up this groove. It was just this, oh, and by the way, Mike, are these going to be 80s grooves? Oh, you betcha. Because if there's one thing Mike can do without having to think about it, it's play 80s grooves. That said, grooves are all the same. This will not. Well, actually, I don't know if this applies to the modern stuff, which is mostly production based. This is still music based advice. Ooh, bam, kidney shot. All right, so this groove that we did as a test. Let me bring that one back up and just play that, and let me just play some chords, and let me show you first a thing that people will often do. And the problem that we're going to be listening for or demonstrating is when what we're doing structurally, motion-wise, groove-wise, pattern-wise is not connected in any way to the rhythm that's actually behind us. Okay, so here's the groove, right? This is perfectly fine groove. So let me play something. Let me add now. Let's try eighths, just straight eighths in the bass. Same thing. Let's reverse it. Let's do this. So the problem there, if you are a session player, it works one of two ways. You lay down a groove, people play on top of it, somebody's got a pattern, and you put a thing behind it. As a drummer, it's usually one of the two directions. And if you don't know this, number one thing, if you're a bass player, especially bass player and the drummer and the bass drummer are usually doing the same thing. They're usually following the same pattern. But in this case, we have a groove. And the problem with what we're playing is that they're not connected to that groove in any way. They're playing eighths, there's eighths going on, there's a hi-hat pattern, right, which if you listen to, it's and you got the bass. Now, if you're a human being, you probably already felt a little something just by me doubling what was going on in the bass drum and my bass notes. But the point is that groove-wise, what this starts to do is starts to connect the patterns, the rhythmic patterns of our chords to the groove underneath it. So if we can capitalize that in a couple of ways. Let's say we just do straight eighths in the right hand, but we use the bass drum pattern to drive the bass notes, okay? So we do this. Now let's reverse it. Let's do let's take that bass drum pattern and let's do it in the right hand, like this. can feel that we're becoming part of the groove. We're not in another world. We're not just off. Which has very little in common with the groove. That is just hitting on the basics. So so if we put those two things together and capitalize on the underpinnings of that groove, both with what we're doing in the bass and both what we're doing with our comp stuff, you'll hear that the whole thing becomes one. It locks in a way. Nothing's changed about our chords. Nothing's changed about the rate at which we're delivering our chords, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is a structural thing. We're just now actually playing the music of the groove. And a huge and surprising number of stuff that I hear is just the groove is something underneath it, and it's not musically connected. So let's put them both together and see that, okay? Hear it? So now we're part of the groove. It's a little thing, but a big thing, because now neither one of those parts is arbitrary. We're not ignoring it. Let me just talk about another thing too, just while we're here, just to give you the bounding volume. Grooves, drum tracks, anything, have their own structure to them. And just like we talk about in harmonies, if your harmonies are very, very simple, it doesn't take long for people to get a hold of them, to understand them, to fully understand them, and then at that point you're starting to trade on when they get bored with them. So one thing that comes into mind when you're listening to a groove is how dense or how short the actual underlying pattern is. Most of our bars in this case are 4/4, but the groove might actually only be 2 beats that repeats over 4 beats. In which case you can actually double the rate of your chord stuff and it might lock in more. Or if you hold it out too long, you're going to stretch out how interesting it is. Let me just do that for example. Let's double it. Let's double the length of our chords. We're following the rhythm. Now you can do this. We are capitalizing on exactly half of what's going on in the drum stuff. It's just a thing to know that is a very different experience for you and for anyone else. You can feel it. It's exact same chords, exact same thing. It's doubled its length. And what's happening is it's not a very complicated process. It's inherently less interesting because we get it. There's a time and place for that. In fact, you can actually use that to your advantage in some ways, but it's too simple for that groove. Let's see if we can double it. It's a little much, right? It's a little much. Not quite enough time to appreciate it. The pattern itself needs a couple of beats. So, and any one of those components is important in terms of figuring out how we're going to lock in our audience. So if we're going to start with a groove, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're not a drummer or whatever, you want to pick a groove, then listening to the music of that groove and using it as an inspiration tool. I mean, my pattern that I'm playing here came from the drum track, not the other way. And it didn't have to be that. It could be anything. And you can pick any part. It just tends to be that in a groove like that, the bass drum going to lock into it more because we're actually capitalizing on what's going in it, and that can be a creative tool. Now, so I'm 14 and I'm playing my little... just like anything else, when you write a piece of music, you are teaching the audience the music. You're teaching your structure, you're teaching them your harmonic language, you're teaching them your modulations, you're teaching them all that stuff. And as their education grows, you can start drifting from the main point because you'll stay connected to it. And so when you're writing pop tunes or anything like, when I was writing library tunes and did this all day, like anything else, contrast is key. Contrast is king. Contrast is where the drama comes from. And in this case, if our main idea, our verse, our chorus or whatever, is this closely tied to what's going on in the groove, in our A section, then it actually allows us to get away with a B section that's got an opposite quality, that maybe it does precisely not hold on to the groove. It wouldn't work if we started that way because we haven't won people's confidence that we're a part of the music. But maybe for a B section, it's precisely the contrast that gives it shape. So let's try that. We'll write a little B section after we do a little groove. Let's do this. So you hear the B section seems like we've made a lot, like it's clearly its own section. It's clearly got its own thing. And we're doing precisely that which basically didn't work at the offset, because by this point we've trained the audience that we know the groove, we can lock into the groove, they can get comfortable with the groove, and now when we actually stray from it and do those longer form kinds of things, they're going to continue to internalize the groove for us. So it's if you've taken the classes in composition, you realize this is a direct parallel to how we teach an audience a thing and then allow us to get away from the main idea. And all I did there, I used chords that were fine. But the impression is that you get the impression, wow, we've got a pad going on or something. It seems a lot thicker. It seems like its own whole idea, its own whole thing, because it is performance-wise, but it's not sounding like we've left the groove. It's not sounding like we've divorced ourselves from the underpinnings of it, which is really, really important. Now, I just noticed the view count's just going down. The people are like, and I don't want to watch this. It's fine. You don't have to, because this is a player's thing. That said, obviously, just playing with a drum machine or a groove helps. Let's grab another thing here, another groove, just as a different something contrasting. So what do we got here? I don't, like I said, I'm sure if you know Groove Agent, this is a great practice tool. If you know Groove Agent, you probably know a bunch of cool loops that I don't know, but this would be my 5 seconds into knowing this program. But this would be fun to do, just go all day, and and what's this groove? What's this one? Oh, it's a totally different groove. Real Huey Lewis thing. Let's do that. My training has always been, my timing has always been my weak point. So do you have advice in fixing it? Yeah, you do it. So here's how you do it. So let me just grab this little groove, because this could be kind of a Huey Lewis thing. Let's see. So you bring up a groove, and in this case, I brought up this little thing. This is a real Huey Lewis thing, right? You don't hear this groove anymore. Now, so if we follow the thing that we did the last time, I go, okay, well, the bass and the bass notes and the bass drum are going to lock together. Well, first of all, it's right on 1 and 3, right? We got. Now, when you're learning how to find the essence of the groove, listen to the individual parts. Hey, baby, there's my girl. Listen to the individual parts. And so even if it's just hi-hat, bass, and kick, hi-hat, kick, and snare, rather, then listen to those and identify them, right? Just so we know that's your bass. And we know that we got this. That's your backbeat. And if we listen, there's sort of a loping thing on the hi-hat. Any one of those parts can be capitalized on. Any one of those rhythms can be capitalized on for any one of the parts that you're doing. It could be in the melody. It could be in a comping thing. It can be in the bass. The important point is just to simply not be completely disconnected from it. Now, this lope, you're in danger of this. That's all in there. We're following the rhythm. We're following the patterns. This groove is actually a very common groove in the 80s, and the way that we solved it was by distributing those exact same parts between basses and keyboards. So we do this. We'd go, where's that? Contrast. All I'm changing there are the lengths of what I'm playing. Regardless of what we think about the groove, in fact, this is probably best because nobody writes music like this anymore. We don't hear like this. This is totally Huey Lewis. But the point is that we can change shape. We can feel the individual delineations in the sections by both capitalizing on, just the basic stuff in music. Number one, we are capitalizing, and he said, if this is it. Yeah, it's got kind of an if this is it kind of vibe to it. But we are capitalizing on, we are not tied, we're not pulled apart from the groove. We're connected to the groove. We're using the individual parts that are going on and directly copying them, directly laying on them, whether it's in our comping melody or our bass, or in this case, a combination of the two. It's just distributing. It's almost like playing drums. When I went into a B section, having established with the audience that we have a groove, we know what we're doing, a deliberate contrast for it. and that allows us to build to that back to our chorus section. And then when I went back to the verse, what changed between that? Note lengths, not even volume so much, because when I'm playing that chord, those feel like very different things. It's just note length. It's just note length. It's just the, and so orchestrationally, that might translate to one's got a pad, one doesn't. One drops the pad, and it's just a comping rhythm guitar. But like I talk about all the time, when you're forced to approximate something on piano, in this case, I'm approximating it by having that pedal down a lot, it's teaching you something about the parts that you actually need. Because clearly I wanted it to have more glue while I was playing the chorus, otherwise I wouldn't have held down the pedal. And learning to take the clues in orchestration or arrangement from your own playing, from what you're trying to get out of it, makes the job a lot easier. So if you can imagine, with this basic tool set, if we're sitting down and looking to write a piece of music, and remember, it's always better to fix something than to create something, or easier to fix something than to create something, then if you put on a groove, you can be like, okay, well, this groove is informing me what my groove is going to be. It's already telling me the nature of my bass parts or the nature of my comping parts. And now I'll get my comping groove set together. Now if I'm going to go into a B section, just think contrasting. If it was short, make it long. If it was long, make it short. And if I need a third delineation, look at my note values. Basically think about turning on and off the pad. I mean, these are the simplest things, but I mean, I filled libraries and libraries and libraries of tunes just basically doing this, because I'd been doing it for years and years. Somebody said, what would be a good practice to go ahead of just 4-chord loop in a track? Listen to so much music with just 4 chords. First of all, there's a lot of things that you're working on here, right? Because some of this is just working out your playing chops. This is a playing chops exercise. There's no question about it. You couldn't really do this without getting your hands in and working it. I mean, you could, but it would be clumsy. But yeah, listening to stuff that has more than 4 chords, will improve and increase your vocabulary. Let's grab another groove just to see something else here. It's this. I don't know what this is. I'd written some things down, but it was hours and hours ago, so I don't remember anymore. Let's see what this is. I kind of like this little app because you can just sort of preview these grooves. Yeah, Mike, we know. Oh, okay. Well, I didn't. Okay, hold on. That's terrible. That's gonna have some just basic groove. This is good because this is 8ths and 4 on the floor. Okay, I'll show you what we can learn with that. We can apply everything we just talked about. So, right, we're talking about a few things at the same time. We're talking about recruiting things from the parts that are underneath. We're also talking about being aware of the how long a pattern is, which tells us something about how long we can sustain interest in it, right? By those rules, if we listen to this groove, which is just 8ths and, oh God, that's the worst fill in the history of man. Okay, however, also no shortage of 80s music had this, because we got just, that's just, right, that's your one bass part, and we got the, and we've also got the 8ths on the, God, nobody ever plays that fill. Okay, so by the way, this is just Groove Agent inside of Cubase. I'm sure Groove Agent, no, I don't know the Groove Agent's anywhere else, but it's in Cubase. It doesn't matter. You can use any loop that you have. It doesn't matter. I just grabbed this because I found it today because I was playing around with Cubase. But now we have clear 8ths. We've got clear 8ths, and we've got, I mean, this is the entire thing, which means that we should, theoretically, if we're writing, we should be able to recruit that 8ths thing in either set of parts anywhere we want to, melodically, chord-wise, bass-wise, and it should connect us to the groove. Let's first of all disconnect for the groove, because the one thing we don't have are super long whole notes. Let's find out how long the individual sections are. So let's try this. Let's just pull our fancy groove, and let's see if we borrow this quickly. little painful. Why? Because this groove is essentially 2 beats long. If we even took that and doubled the speed, I have to do this. I can't. Where's feel that? Give this wonder fill. There you go. Let's double it. Nope. Sounds like so. We know it's in here. So in terms of that's our division. Those are our subdivisions. Those are our little packets of interest. Shorter than that, it gets frenetic. Longer than that, it gets boring. Kind of irrespective of what we do, but we could probably disprove that in a minute. But let's test this thing. If we recruited the eighths pattern in the bass, will that work? Let's try that. I wish I could just make this start at 1. You probably can. Go the other way. Right? It'll work either way. This is why so much stuff was done in the 80s. And because it's that consistent eighth, we could probably continue to capitalize on it. Any combination of eighths, like something like this, like a any one of those things will work because the groove has such clear delineations of eighths. And it's not a coincidence that there's so many tunes, pop tunes, capitalize on this, because you can see that unlike some of the other grooves that we did, this one's a lot more forgiving. In fact, when you have something that simple, which is essentially you have more freedom to divorce yourself from the actual slavish driving of the groove, because it's so simple you can't lose connection with it, and virtually anything is going to connect to it. Now we've stayed connected to it here through eighths, but what happens if we put sixteenths against it? Because we don't have a clear 16th subdivision delineation. Let's just try something. Do this. Totally works. Totally fine. We're using 16th subdivisions against it, and it doesn't feel like it's disconnected from the groove, because that eighth groove is so simple, and it has no variation to it. It's like the ultimate template upon which to build pretty much any groove. Nonetheless, we saw that, if you wanted to, if you just do whole notes and you're not in any way connected to it, you're not going to connect with the groove, and you're not going to connect with an audience. Subconsciously, after listening to a lifetime of music, people are aware to the degree to which the musicians in the band, whether it's a virtual band or not, are playing together, are informing each other of what they do. There's actually a parallel for this in orchestral orchestration, but in terms of a groove thing, it's like very, very, very obvious, right? Let me see here. I'll show you another groove. And this is probably, let's see, let's try something else, just something totally different, like let's see if we can break it. K240 or something. So you can pretty much, you can do almost anything with that groove, right? What headphones are these? K240s. So even something like that, there's just, you know, we can dry it up, we can open it up, we can have more of a paddy kind of thing, not because of that particular groove. That would not have worked on another groove that we played earlier. Let's just, I think I have another one that I chose from, just as another example. It could be the same groove for all I know, because I don't, let's see, but let's see. Here's another one. It doesn't matter. This is just one thing which, first of all, is a great opportunity to practice your playing, but it's also a great opportunity to practice your compositional improvising because so much of it can be done for you. This is why I talk about, when I talk about practicing modulations and doing stuff, one of the reasons I always say to use K240s. One of the reasons I say to use existing tunes is because it just gets you over the hump of, like, where do I start? Well, if you've decided that the first place you're going to start is by taking some of the rhythmic cues from the drum loop you happen to select, well, you're off to the races. You've already started. That's a great thing. And as you're practicing, you know, different styles, which is absolutely something that you should be able to do as a composer, you should be able to do different styles. You're pulling up drum loops from different styles is super, super, super useful. What's I looking for here? Let me see. Let's, I don't know why I wrote this down. It's called Cuts and Wishes. That doesn't sound like that would be a good groove. Cuts and Wishes. Let's hear what that one is. Okay. Why did I choose that one? Well, let's just see what we can do with that. Let's say that was the groove you were handed. Because right away, my thought is, I don't think piano's going to go on this anything. But there's plenty of stuff to recruit there. So let's just listen to it. First of all, there's like a tom thing, and it's got a pitch. Listen to the rhythm. So we use that for that same first chord. This is real 70s, even though the sound isn't. So even something funky like that, which doesn't seem like it would be for a tune that you'd play on piano, if we're listening to what's going on in the groove and capitalizing on it, then we can stay connected to it. And you can tell it's the same tune we played from the beginning, but it's like it's kind of a different tune, only because the groove is different and we're not ignoring it. We're actually staying connected to it. Okay? And again, you know, in this case, this serves so many purposes. If you haven't done a lot of playing with it, you know, there's a lot of stuff I'm doing here is kind of clav-based, but it doesn't matter because if the thing you're taking from it is that you're capitalizing on. You can hear that's part of that groove. in a way that this would not be. That's not related to the groove, no matter what we did with it. The groove is not in that place. That's not what's going on beneath us. So, just in some ways, we hear this a lot too, in all the trailer music and all the epic stuff. There's all the epic percussion stuff is usually like loud and it's patterny, but it's not usually intrinsically tied to anything else that's going around. It's just a bed. And it's best to not think of grooves as a bed. It's best to think of them as the fucking rhythm section. And they're playing together and they're taking cues off of each other, and everything must be intrinsically tied to that groove. Otherwise, you haven't created the hook, the rhythmic hook. So this can tell you so much about the kind of parts that you might write. And am I singing music in my head while improvising? Yeah, sure. Yes, I mean, to some degree, there's a lot going on, because one part of me is trying to focus fully on the groove, and the other part is trying to, not sit here for 6 hours and forget that I was on camera. So there's a lot going on in my head. But I'm also doing chord progressions that I know work, more or less, unless I clam my way through them. But I come up with a lot of different types of chords and chord progressions because I've studied a lot of music. But like I'm saying, there's just a thing here which applies to any kind of music that you write. But especially for this sort of thing, if you want to learn about structure, pop stuff is the best kind of structure, because you can just do ABA form or ABA C. You can do a lot of different types of stuff. And when you turn we're not using any instruments, boys and girls. This is a piano. That's all it is. And yet we can clearly feel B sections and A sections and verses out of them. And that's everything that you need to know. Clearly, it's not about the sounds. There must be something else that makes a thing feel like we've moved into another section. We haven't really harmonically gone anywhere. We're not really getting louder or quieter. That's right. It's the articulations. It's the performance. The nature of the performance can change the delineation between sections. That's a good thing to know the next time we feel tempted to grab a sound. So a lot of this is just about capitalizing on and exploring, musicianship, which is curiously absent from so much composing. But this little thing, I mean, even if you're just starting, identifying the parts of the groove, this is like working with a virtual musician. This is like working with a drummer. Only the drummers come and he has no interest in what you want to play. He's just got his grooves. And now the question is, are you going to play with him or not? So even going through the effort of trying to identify what's going on, I don't know. I could just grab another groove here. That's all the ones I'd earmarked. Let's see here. That's a perfectly good groove. Same thing. No matter what the groove is, and it doesn't matter. In fact, doing them across a bunch of styles would help. We can try to. I don't know how to find another style, but we can just see, I think this is a lot like the one we did. There's a chord I'm trying to work out here. This is an anticipatory give. Listen. It's all anticipate. While there's a beat there, That's not the groove. Yes, there's a downbeat on one, but that's not the groove. That's where the groove is. No matter what it is, no matter what your chords are, no matter what the song is, no matter what style it is, no matter what era it's from, the musicianship of parts means that they're all connected. They're all listening to each other. They're all informing each other. And that's musicality. That's musicianship. There's not a bed. There's not a part. They're not separate. They're never separate. No aspect of music is separate from the others. The melody is not separate from the chords. The chords and the melodies together are not separate from the structure. The structure and the chords and the melody together are not separate from the orchestration. The orchestration and the chords and the melody are not separate from the instrument, from the articulations and the performance. Those are all connected. Everything's connected. If we went back to that idea earlier where we had this one. I just did. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not the groove. It's not bad, but it's not the groove. Feel which one is more connected and more inherently interesting. It's not as rigidly restrictive a groove as you might think. But again, even taking that exploratory time is such great time well spent. So great. Even if you're just trying to figure out what is the groove? What is the groove for that? And you're going or you're trying maybe an off thing. You're trying that thing. It's not quite connected somehow. And you try something else. That's different than... They're different. Right or wrong isn't really on the table here, boys and girls. Connected or more or less connected is the thing that we're looking at, because ultimately therein lies the musicianship and our awareness of the individual components. So yes, I don't know if there's any. Believe it or not, that's pretty much all I had to say on that. Because we have a lot of, because playing as a thing is not like super common anymore. It's when I was coming up, everybody was playing. Guitar Center didn't have to offer lessons. Everybody wanted to. It was just going and buy guitars and then take them home and play like their favorite guy in a band. And I don't really know there's even bands really. From a playing standpoint, man, even if you just use predictable chord progressions, this is super, super great time well spent. Plus you're playing, and if you're improving your playing, and just in case Draco's absolutely going to be doing this, he always plays to a metronome, and and I've just sort of had it back in my mind. I haven't told him, but when his discipline on a metronome is like really, really tight, and he's always doing it, even when I'm not looking and all that, then I'm going to reward him with the drum machine, which is with grooves, because it's way more fun. I was just trying to see if there was any way for me to know immediately that there was a different, like kind of groove. Like, I'm sure there's a way to sort, but I don't know. Like something that says like country, like a country kind. Oh, yeah, country. Look at that. All right. Is this one? Let's see what this is. Another style. boring. How about this one? By the way, this is like 120. So if that's your groove, if somebody handed that to you and go, yeah, our drummer's playing this, and you're like, no, can we maybe do something? No, that's what the drummer's playing. Okay. Are you sure we can't play that? No, we're playing that. Well, all right. So that beat is 2 beats long. It's the same thing every 2 beats, basically, except for that little, which is why you know that your pace is. That's where it is. That's where it is, because that's where the groove is. You don't need a full bar. You could, but you don't need. Fucking patterns looped 4 times before we've even gone through, right? So that again, learning how simple that underlying pattern is helps develop the muscle of when are we overstaying our welcome? Like how much of this idea, how fast we have to serve it up, how inherently complex or simple it is, because that's the worst thing is to bore an audience. Playing to a metronome was key to me playing in a band for several years and still do, yeah. And recording yourself is also very useful. Yeah, well, that's the other thing that I was doing, is I was playing to grooves and I was always recording myself. But anyway, so no matter what style is, and I think this would be the thing to do. I mean, it's just, if I was just loading up grooves here, I think this is what I do all day. As I would think I would just load up a bunch of grooves and just play to them. And you can tell where the groove is on that, and practice, locking into them. In terms of which chords you're playing, I don't think it matters in the beginning. It's a perfectly good groove to use. At some point, you're probably, if you only know 4 chords, and it does not matter, but if you only know 4 chords, you'll probably venture out to find maybe a 5th chord somewhere because you'll want to blow your brains out. But that's fine. You could just use E, A, and B or something, or D and G and A. Because you may not be able to immediately, when you first start, to figure out. It may take you a minute. Even if that's where you start, just trying to figure out where it is and putting that much under your hands, if you don't do that and can't do that, that's great time. It's time well spent. You're developing musicianship, playing ability. Believe it or not, there was actually a time, it was from about 30,000 years ago until about 20 years ago, that you had to actually be able to do that to be a musician. There was no other way to be a musician. There was you had to play an instrument and stuff. Anyway, I'm glad that worked, because technically this should not be working. There should be a giant feedback loop because the output is actually routed to the input, but there's some sort of problem causing it to be a pre-fader thing. It's not passing its own signals, so the entire thing did not just collapse into a nightmare of feedback, and we actually had a group thing. Anyway, that was all. Just wanted to give that as an exercise and something to do. And if there's any questions about it, I'm happy to answer them now. Otherwise, definitely take some time and. Even if it's just learning to play tunes that already exist, and you pull up a drum pattern that's similar to it, that's great time. That's time well spent. Playing, just being able to play, especially with a drum machine on or whatever. That's how you can tell how old I am. When a drum machine on is fun. It's actually fun to play. Music is actually fun. Mike, I downloaded Comp 124 and Counterpoint. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. I hope that you're enjoying them or will enjoy them. I know you will. I appreciate that. And yeah, it'll keep you busy a while too. And you know the thing about those classes is you'll do them and then you'll come away with one thing and you'll come back to them and you'll come back. People come back to them a lot and rediscover stuff that's in them because they're usually long, right? They're 3 to 5 hours, something like that. So I'm blabbering, and there's a lot of stuff in there. So 1, 2, and 4 should hold you a bit. Yeah, man. And Counterpoint was fun too. Counterpoint, I think you could just say, just wherever there's a hole, that's where you put something. It's not strictly counterpoint, but it's the useful kind of counterpoint that actually makes for interesting lines. Anyway, first time to your master classes and took those on your recommendation. Oh yeah, man, you'll like them. They're like I said, they're carefully considered. I wish somebody had said that stuff to me early. I mean, I guess, you get a certain, you get an understanding of stuff when you do trial and error. That said, there's a lot of error. That would have saved, just a few hints would have saved me probably years. So, you can't beat the doing, but it can be intelligent doing. It can be guided doing, just like maybe stay in this area. Here's a concept. Instead of, I have no concept, I'm just going to try to write stuff, which can be depressing. Anything else? Is Counterpoint 1 Composition 3? Yeah, it is. I mean, it was originally Composition 3, and then I was like, that's not going to confuse people. I got to confuse people. Are there any particular thought process on what chord inversion you use and when? Yeah, because one. I don't know if you're new to the channel, you probably haven't heard this story that I've told a billion times, but the very first tune I ever wrote when I was 5 or 6, it went like this. It went. Something like that. The very first tune I ever wrote. And I played it for my mom, and my mom said, it has no melody. And I was like so mad about it because first of all, she shit all over my tune. And she wasn't like, it's nice, honey. She's like, it has no melody. She was really shitty about it. I don't know why, but it turned out to be one of the best things ever because it occurred to me that on some level, I could tell was the melody, and or maybe it was, and that whatever I was hearing in my head, I learned that I heard chords first, not melodies. I heard chords that other people weren't necessarily aware of what the melody note was. And so as I began to actually try to learn to write melodies so my mother wouldn't hate on my music, I started realizing that, that if I'm careful about the top note, it's always the top note of the chord, not always, but if it's the top note of the chord, people are going to be led to more of a melody. So those same chords, in some other capacity, it's exactly the same chords. Why is one more effective? Well, one, that top note is making a more scale-wise motion. So I started just developing an idea that be protective of that top note and let those notes be melodic, more melodic than not. And obviously that's going to determine much about what your inversions are that you're using. If you have a mind toward, one of the things you probably saw me teach Draco in his lesson the other day was he did a thing, like I had him do 1, 4, 5. And I had him do it in root position so that he would get it, but then I said make it efficient. And that's exactly the word and exactly the concept, efficient. because efficiency translates directly to good voice leading and good orchestrations. It's very efficient, hardly any motion. Those are perfect. That's the same chords. It's exactly the same chords. One is much easier to connect to because of its scale-wise motion than the other one is mostly, stepwise intervallic. And therein is much of the DNA of good melodies and good voice leading and thus good orchestration. So, the third of any chord is very, very, it tells you everything about a chord. And so its arrival and its departure are always conspicuous. It's just very powerful. So if you start a melody, it's like I usually start melodies. I don't very often start melodies on the tonic. I usually start them on the ninth. I'm a real ninth guy. So I will use ninths or whatever, but those are very different chords then. Very mindful of what's actually going on melodically with the top note of the chord, so it's directly tied to the inversion that I'm choosing. Also, the key and the range, because obviously we talk about this in orchestration, that this is always your meatiest range. This is where the tonalities are so clear. Can't necessarily what you're playing up here, It's not the same. So, yeah, but at a glance, certainly being able to do the chords and all their inversions, that's just super. That's just memorizing. But that's also really, really useful because when you're ever someplace, if you're here in B flat, after a while, if you've done all of you spent time with it, then as you're physically looking, and I always recommend this, as you're physically looking at that B flat, you are seeing, that, well, sure, you're the sus2 or the sus4, you're right there, but man, you are also, real close to the D flat. It's just one, or to an F, or to a B diminished. So, when you're writing and playing, when you see that B flat, you're like, well, I'm right there, or I'm right here. Because it's right there, I can see it. I can tell that I'm in B flat root position, but I'm real close to D flat in its second inversion. So just doing those exercises to get them visually in your head, that just helps as you're sort of looking like, oh, I'm here, I'm right here. I'm close to stuff. That's not a little thing. That is a thing that helps those choices go from arbitrary to intentional. In the beginning, you'll probably discover them through accident, but not if you're doing that deliberately to practice. What am I clues to? What if I moved one finger? What can I do? Well, if I just move the B flat, I can get to D minor. Or I can just I've learned how to modulate. Doing those back and forth chord progressions will really train the ear too, for sure, absolutely. No, look, there's everything you get from playing music teaches you music. There's no question about it. Either that or the ninth is an integral flavor to my melodies, brings an ambiguity, which is useful. We talk about that in one of the modulation classes. We talk about the absolute, and composition 4 actually gets into headier territory that we don't normally do. We're talking about the inherent bias that people have towards major tonalities, such that, that it's almost like anything else is a liability. But yes, suspensions are deliberately that. They're suspensions. I'm not sure. Is it cool yet or not? I don't know. It's got potential. But clearly we're happy. Clearly we're sad. Another suspension. Not sure yet. Thanks, Mike. That was really helpful. One more. For me, it is easier to visualize chords as some sort of pattern since I'm a guitar player. Yeah, should I think of more as intervals, as notes? I don't think I'm qualified to tell you that because I'm not a guitar player. So I'm not sure what, but here's my instinct. My instinctual answer is, if you want to learn a language other than the one that you natively speak, the worst way to do it is to translate every word in the new language back to your language. That puts a step in there which will permanently stop you from being able to communicate in true real time like a native speaker. The filter, you're doing twice the work. The way that you ultimately learn to truly be fluent in a second language is to simply think in that language. You don't go, cup, and so it's cup, but it's not, it's this. You just remember, just like a baby does, no, the new word for this object is whatever it is. It's that. And it's just that. That's just what it is. And when you, that's how you can do it. So my instinct would be, just don't think about things in terms of guitar. And I think the way that you think about them after that is sort of irrelevant. Should I think of them as intervals or notes? I don't think that matters. I think the understanding of music defies even those terms, because if you didn't have any word for it, you'd still know that the inherent quality of this was somehow unpleasant. You just would, there's something about it. We can call it dissonance. We can call it, it's actually a major seventh, but you just split it by an octave and suddenly it's the basis of one of the prettiest chords you could possibly have. There it is. It's just the context that changes it. So I just wouldn't, don't make it harder on yourself. That's not really where the understanding comes from. The experimentation will teach you more than anything else because your brain will be trying to make sense of it in the way that your brain uniquely tries to make sense of things. The process that I use to learn will not probably apply to yours, which is why I teach conceptual stuff and don't just grab you by the hand and say, do this exact thing and have you follow it, because that won't constitute understanding. If I can tell you, here's the goal, we're getting from A to B, here's 3 different efficient ways to do it, the actual doing of it needs to be yours on your terms and your ways, because that's the only way that you actually ever learn something. Each one of our learning processes have things in common, but then are also uniquely tailored to the environment we were in when we were in our formative years. Am I shooting myself in the long? No, you're not. Suspensions, the suspension of disbelief, the belief of a tonal center. Right? Yes. Right. Right. It's the word association football. But yeah, man, play with grooves, man. Play with, pull those things up and learn to play piano. Anything. That's, Somebody said, what is your thought on associating different key centers to different emotions? Like, do you think, for example, to me, B flat major is fanfare regal? So chances are that is, you've got a causality error there. So much regal fanfare stuff is written in B flat. Always has been. not always, but for certainly all the music you're listening to, has been because it's very friendly for brass instruments. B flat is a great key for brass instruments and for writing regal fanfares. And if you have any sort of absolute pinch sensibility, and it turns out that the average person actually does have some, like, they did a test some years ago, and like air ball when they're doing it air ball at the basketball, everybody was doing it in F. Just sort of everybody was, worldwide average people would sing air ball in F. It's like, that's kind of curious. Draco tried to translate jump into E flat the other night. Yeah. And he was like, yeah. And he was like, it sounds weird. Was that because he had just played it in the right key? I don't know. We'll never really know. But so chances are that no, keys don't have an absolute thing, because remember that other than for the perfect pitch people, pitch can be out of tune. I mean, that's a thing. Even the standard of A440 is completely arbitrary. It's tied to the cycles per second, and that's essentially arbitrary. We've tied it to a cesium atom now, but that can change. The length of a year has changed, so a second isn't exactly a second. Thus, A440 isn't exactly A, which is why the A432 stuff is all shit. It's bullshit. It's all based on an arbitrary standard. But it makes people feel like they've found the universe or something. So, all right. Doesn't matter. But so I don't think worry about inherent keys. However, you will find that certain keys are friendlier for certain instruments because of where they fall. B flat and C, good. You'll find, you'll get into G and A and E, while they're good on strings because they represent a lot of the open strings usually, sometimes. You'll just find that you end up in a weird place. It's always too high or it's always too low. Like you'll learn that in the doing of it. And then you'll discover, that's tied to the instrument ranges. So it's probably more that. It's probably more that, most fanfare stuff's written in B flat. D minor is the saddest of all keys. I think it's a musician's job, and I feel that I've really let the side down that I can't immediately play "Lick My Love Pump." I think that's it. What was it? B flat? Just simple lines intertwining. I think that's Lick My Love Pump. Bourbon, it's just Jack Daniels. I just grabbed some I was on my way over and I'm like, I'll grab my Jack Daniels. But anyway, so play with grooves. That's get your groove on and play. And, that's the thing, too. It's like so many left hands just relegated to pushing a few keys while the right hand gets all the love. I was just looking, there was like a whole electronica section, which I think if you're a piano player, I don't think any of this stuff you really could do much with. What is this? I think this would just not work. Yeah, you don't need to work with that groove. That's a groove, but I don't think that's gonna. I don't think you need to. That we have that one. That one's done. It's a different type of thing. That's all. The density of a lot of those types of grooves has evolved because they have to hold the whole thing together, because they're holding up the entire thing. There's not an interplay going on between multiple parts, and I've noticed that there's a lot of things in electronic grooves is they're super super dense with shit going on because there's no actual interplay. There's just nothing's the interplay itself isn't really happening. So that's the whole thing. It's all self-contained. And in fact, you'll notice that there's no shortage of those grooves actually have tonality stuff in them. Like they're literally doing, I don't think I could find one if I wanted to, but that they often have tonality in them. It's like, yeah, we'll handle any bass. That's your groove. You're locked in. You're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything. I mean, it's Jaws. So that's all you're doing. That groove. But it's the tonalities built in, and now you're locked from going anywhere. But it's also burdened with holding the entire thing together. And the only way that tune can stay interesting is to change up its sounds, because it's just permanently built a thing into the thing. Are you subdividing beats in eighths or sixteenths underneath? Well, as we talked about earlier, it depends on the groove, right? We played a couple grooves in which subdividing to the exact groove was great, but it also, that one that was just basically eighths, straight eighths with 4 on the floor, we were able to play kind of clavy 16th stuff against it. And then there's other times in which you can tell, you're fighting it, you're putting too much on it, it's not. And listening to that and recruiting that from the direct parts underneath it, especially in simple drum grooves, is the first place to start. So yeah, triplets or whatever. I mean, there's, when we were doing, I don't know if you saw it from the beginning, but when we were doing those contrasting B sections, those contrasting B sections were things that wouldn't have worked out of the gate. They would have not been connected to the groove. But once we've connected to the groove, and once we've shown the audience what that connection is, that sets us up to drift from it and still maintain a connection to it, because it'll still stay connected even though we've not as slavishly adhering to it as we were before. That happens in all forms of music and all forms of orchestration. That's exactly the thing that we want to do harmonically, and not. And in this case, it's also in terms of the style and the arrangement. Mike, I think I've asked this on Red Band before, but I love "Trip to Earth" from Superman. Was John lifting from there? We're speaking in general in that score, but that cue is more Stravinsky. Yeah, it is. Cue that he lifted from immediately, it's not going to be like that. And every cue isn't lifted from a famous piece of music. And if you were John Williams or anybody sitting down and you knew that this was going to be a long, protracted piece, which you'll notice that scene and type of scene does not exist in films in any capacity whatsoever, where a director goes, John will just handle this. It's just basically John handling it for long stretches. There's just no expectation on the part of directors, and there's just nobody's being asked to do that, which is why nobody does and can. But in that case, if you were sitting down and you're looking for the emotional sense, a dramatic sense of traveling, then the main figure, which underlies that piece, is a very natural expression of that, right? It could have been something with motion in it. That doesn't seem appropriate for a child in a space kind of thing. So it's so much about that cue as a natural extension of the dramatic needs it's serving. And the figure itself is, it's a backbone figure, which is recruited and modulated on a billion ways. But I can't immediately think of, it's not usually like that. Every cue is lifted from a score. Nah. Sorry to ask, as a newbie, could you explain Red Band? Yeah, it's just our forum. It's a forum I started specifically for you guys who there's other music forums out there. But I wanted ours to be one in which people who are really legitimately and principally trying to be better composers, it's more focused. There's virtually no discussion about sounds or any, or plugins, because that's what every other forum is entirely about. And it's all about chords, modulation, development, long form symphonic writing. It's about true control of our craft and true control of our skill, by which we ultimately control our lives and our destinies. So it's just a small little forum, but everybody who's on it is really trying to level up skill wise. What they do with it, I mean, there's people who work in all fields, but it's just it's a self-selecting set. It's people who are trying to create a little community that's anything like it was for composers 50, 60 years ago, where the expectations on us were so much higher. And the environments in which we were learning were so much richer because our expectations were higher. The expectations on us are higher. You go in, you want to be a composer, you couldn't do it without skills. And then you go in and you have your Jerry Goldsmith's assistant or whatever. You're writing cues all fucking day long, and then you're going in and having to conduct them, and you're having to orchestrate them and arrange them and copy. Just to even be in the room, you've got to have all these skills. Well, that world is totally gone. So we've sort of created a little mini pocket of that world. Like, okay, well, let's all go back together and see if we can't rediscover and be our own little community for building each other up and for getting the kind of feedback that elsewhere we might not get. So that's what it is. Anyway, yeah, man, play with grooves. That's my theory. That's my go back and listen to some of them and what we've said, by the way, is it's everything that you need to know. There's really no more to it than that. Take your time analyzing the grooves, learning. You'll know if you've run out of chord progressions, in which case go get more chord progressions by listening to other stuff. But just developing the sensibility of listening to the other parts that are playing, to listening to what's going on, and then using them to write is fun and will improve your musicianship and make composing much easier. Do I approach montage shots, time-lapse composing differently? No. I never approach music differently than at any other time. My goal is always to write a piece of music. Always. It's to write a piece of music that unless it's very specifically designed to not be self-supporting, it's always designed to be self-supporting. You can pull it outside of the thing. It's serving two masters. When you can do that, that's the holy grail. When you can write music that perfectly satisfies the picture and the visual and satisfies all the dramatic beats, but at the same time somehow is a completely self-supporting piece of music that works totally on its own, that tells its own cohesive story, that's an amazing thing, and all the greatest scores possess it. You can listen to them. It's like Peter and the Wolf. You can listen to the movie from the first cue to the end, and you know exactly what's going on. You know what act you're in. You know where the story is. You become familiar with the themes. You understand what the characters are. It's not like a bunch of cues, which is how scores have devolved. They're just cues. They're all fine. They're all cool sounding. They all work for the scenes. They're appropriate, but they don't tell a story. It's little vignettes. It's like a sketch show. And none of the great scores that we revere and that still sell tickets out 40 years, 50 years after they were written, they all possess that other quality. It's music. And it works for the picture. So unless it's something deliberately aleatoric that's not supposed to allow you to lock onto it. Unless it's that. In which case, I'm very deliberately not doing a thing, but that's deliberate. That's a conscious choice. And I won't do very much of that unless it has a contrasting element, which is the part that you can absolutely lock on. That's how that becomes not frustrating, because that's clearly a contrasting intent. It's like anything else. Don't have loud if you don't have quiet. Don't have epic if you don't have, something to contrast it to. It's always about contrast, always. Consonance, dissonance, loud, quiet, fast, slow, all those. So no, I don't approach any piece of music differently. I take the burden of, okay, so this needs to work for the scene and hit all the right beats, and then also when you turn off the picture, it's totally its own piece of music. Oh, hi back. Sorry, man. Sorry I didn't see you. I'm good. How are you? Sensitive people. We like sensitive people. I think. How should I have asked? Oh, which colors informed how he orchestrated and drew? Well, look, if you're any idea, if you were doing whatever. That was your idea for whatever reason. Could be anything. You didn't do this. You didn't go, that's the storm. Same idea, very different. They mean different things. The very range that you do that in makes the orchestration choice for you. You know? And so if you're starting this idea and you want to ease into it, you want to, you know, then sure, strings and possibly muted strings and doing that sort of thing, natural choice. It's probably in the range that he played it. Anything else? No more questions? So that's all. Everybody, thanks for coming. And I know we deliberately picked a time when people were kind of either asleep or, you know, going to bed. But that's because it was just going to be a test, and I promised it wasn't going to be a 4-hour class, and it isn't. But definitely start doing more groove stuff, and then you know, and enjoy the multitudinous benefits you get from doing so as a player and as a musician, and being sensitive to other things you're doing, and also enjoy having so much of your compositional work done for you. And then you can translate those into your orchestral writing. How often do I write music within my computer? Not very often, because it's nowhere near as fast. I'm faster, much faster here at the piano, and yeah. But yeah, come up to the forum, man, and check it out. And you know, when you post your stuff, and there are people will help, and if they don't, just nudge them. But there's been lots of great advice, and everybody there is taking the classes. The classes all have their own subsection, actually, on the forum to ask questions about the classes if you've taken one. Yeah, man, and we're just all in this together, as always, and trying to improve, and it's what it's for. Plus, you know, it's a totally, like, cool community. Everybody is super cool. There's never been any drama on the forum. There's never been any bullshit. Everybody's adult. Part of that, and we know, is because you got to use your name. Everybody uses their real name. It's amazing how that just changes the discourse. All discourse, human discourse, immediately changes once there's any consequences for it. That was one of the first, like, nice thing. You know what? Everybody's using their name. We're not going to have the lawgiver isn't going to be on the forum. You know what I mean? We're just going to have John Peters. Okay, John, what do you got to say? Well, I'm wondering about modulation. Well, let me help you. I use my name. I never had a handle. I don't want to be anybody else. All right. That's it. Thanks, everybody. See you later.